It's the Two
Strange. Okay, here we go. We are recording. No prep or anything like that. Just straight in. Boom.
Just raw dogging it.
We've got an hour just raw dogging it.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, so we are two strange men, and we are very busy. We're busy bees, aren't we?
Like you wouldn't believe. Well, you probably could believe it. But
Yeah, just
like,
collecting all that honey, that yummy honey.
Yeah.
And now what we're going to do is we're going to share some of that honey with you, everyone.
We're gonna cook it up.
Cook it up. What are we making?
Honey nut cereal. I just.
And honey cakes.
put
I
some-
love honey cakes.
Is honey cake a thing?
It must be. It sounds like the thing that Japanese people eat. Like they've got their rice balls with a bit of seaweed, the
Yeah.
nori stuff, and then just some honey cakes.
Is that what we're gonna do when we get to like 100 podcasts? Like 100.
Go to Japan?
and have a honey cake.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Just be like, can I have a honey cake? And they're like, I don't know what you mean.
I don't know what you mean. I heard it in a podcast once.
Yes, you do. Make me one now. I'm not leaving till it's made.
Okay, all right. So the yummy honey today is about voices.
Voices in your head.
And why the fuck are we talking about voices, Tom?
Well, if you've been a diligent listener, which I know you have,
Yeah.
we did Birdman last week.
Yeah.
And a very central theme of Birdman is the idea of like, is the titular character of Birdman real? He's kind of seeing hallucinations and hearing voices in the head. And when we talked about the idea of a companion episode, we both kind of agreed that actually the idea of voices in the head and mental health and schizophrenia and the history of like religious iconography in terms of hearing things was just super interesting. Right?
Yeah, definitely. And what's interesting is we really didn't cover the voices in his head or the telepathy or anything that was strange.
We just got angry.
We just got angry and ranted about the theatre, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like a correct course
Okay.
to sort of like underpin the strange things, because we didn't talk about many strange things. We
Yeah.
just went, God, the theatre's crap, innit?
But look, I hope, listener, you realise that you're getting a great in-depth sort of like exploration of films. This is so much better than your run-in-the-mill, average, shitty fuckety podcast.
So we got a film podcast that we're better at that.
All of them.
Like Clash of the Titles, come on.
Come on, that sucks, man.
Yeah, I mean,
sucks.
I've only watched one episode, but
Yeah.
yeah. What's his name? Alex, whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
your podcast sucks, mate. We're coming for you.
I'm not gonna create a media storm by adding more
Yeah.
in there. But yeah, they all suck. All right.
Beef is how you get big on the internet.
That's it. This isn't like a bad movie podcast. Yeah, this is strange movies. Okay. Anyway, let's get into it. Voices. Now, you've got a huge amount of notes there. I've just got like some notes, but on very big paper. So I'm gonna let you spearhead this. Go.
Yeah, well, this was actually like a tactical ploy, right, to mess with your mental health a little bit, because
Oh,
yeah,
lots of blank pages.
look
Well
at
done.
that. So these are the cast-offs, because as you said, we do it right here.
Yeah.
So these are like notes that I don't need now.
Oh.
Because there's so much about this topic, and
Interesting.
These notes, they're the creme de la creme of what I feel like we need to talk about.
Nice. Okay, we'll get stuck in. Go on. Give
so-
us some stuff.
I've kind of been looking at schizophrenia and mental health in terms of voices, because we can categorize this in many different ways, right?
Yeah.
Because conceptually, a lot of us hear some type of voices in our head, whether it's kind of our own voices and we narrate our own lives, or whether that goes further when we start to conceptually hear voices outside of that, or hallucinations. So I kind of delved into the idea of schizophrenia, and the history of that is really interesting.
Can I just like stop there because I've got like a nice little thing to add to that before
go
we
for
move on. Okay, so like we all, don't we? We all hear voices, right?
Yeah.
A lot of us do. There is a surprising amount of people that don't necessarily hear voices in their head, though.
Right.
Now there was a statistic that was like knocking around on like psychology and science websites and Reddit and stuff like that I just really had a problem with. It was basically saying that like 70% of people don't have an inner voice. It's bollocks.
Yeah,
it's
don't trust that.
It's like people haven't read what they're basing it on before they make that conclusion. But anyway, I looked into it, and essentially there are people that like everyone's frame of reference, the way in which people see the world, perceive the world is remarkably different to like each other. So the way in which you combine the ways of thinking are going to be a lot different to me. So there's a scientist or psychology professor from the University of Nevada called Russell Herbert. He's been looking at this idea of inner experience for like 40 years, okay? And he has identified 5 main ways of thinking, okay? So inner speaking and inner monologue, this idea that's contested that's, you know, when you're talking to yourself, well, you must be crazy. No, everyone talks to themselves, you know? Hearing your voice or someone else or audibly recalling a phone number, for example. Yeah, I often, when I'm in the shower, I will just be going over conversations that I've had with other people and stuff, and I'll carry that conversation on. I'll go like, okay, where will I take this? And I'll do my bits of the conversation. I'll do other bits of the conversation. You know, it's not a strange thing. We do it all the time. But there's also visual imagery as well. So inner seeing, visualizing things. I think I struggle with that more. I think I'm more of a words person than I am like a visual. Yeah. Then, obviously, there's the conscious experience of emotional process, like, so feeling, yeah? Then there's unsymbolized thinking, so no word or image associated with thoughts, pouring your morning coffee without telling yourself to, that sort of thing. Working on impulse and stuff.
Like, I suppose that's the point, right? I can't conceptually even think of that. Because right now, I'm going, okay, Tom, next plot point, next and I'm kind of categorizing stuff in my mind.
But you know, you can't conceptualize that because that's going on in the background beyond your consciousness, isn't it? You know, you've got your subconscious, you know, you've got your conscious, your pre-conscious, and your unconscious. If we're thinking of, you know, that metaphor of the iceberg, you're only really seeing the tip of the iceberg, the conscious elements. And that's like all of those other things that I've been looking at. So feelings, inner speaking, and visual imagery and stuff. But then underneath that, you've got your pre-conscious and your unconscious. And that makes that huge, massive part of the iceberg that like weighs it all down and keeps it floating and stuff. And yeah, the only other one to look at would be sensory awareness. So paying attention to a sensory aspect of the environment for an unimportant reason. So, for example, hearing someone talk, but seeing the light reflecting off their glasses and stuff, you know, easily distracted, like me. Anyway, so yeah, it was a bit of a digression, but I saw an opening there because it was a chance for us to look at those like bits of thinking and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So carry on.
And it kind of nicely comes to my first point, right? So we met each other in the corridor a couple of days ago. We work together. It tends to happen.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about like doing the research for this episode.
Yeah. And you got distracted because I spat in the floor in front of you. But you should be used to that now because I do that whenever I see you.
I mean, there was that, and my internal monologue was like, well, that's a weird thing for Carl to do. And then I remember saying to you, oh, you know, I'm going to kind of talk about like mental health, and there's that bookie thing, the book, and we had this whole kind of like 3-minute conversation where I just could not get my words out.
Yeah, I suggested that it was the Bible. What was the book?
So the book is the DSM. Now, here's where I refer to my notes, because I always get this little like tidbit wrong of like what the DSM stands for.
Okay.
So I'm going to verbatim read it out. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, DSM, go and give it to me.
So, if I can actually find it in my notes somewhere, that would be really helpful, wouldn't it?
Dick Searchers Magazine.
It's not quite that, but it's like similar. So the DSM stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
Sounds like a riveting read.
Yeah, and they're currently on DSM 6.
Okay.
So the first DSM
it's
came
like Fast
out
and Furious.
In 1952.
It's got loads of sequels.
Yeah, but real slow burn, right? The first one in 1952. And what's super interesting about this is every time there's a new volume, so this DSM is used to assess people with mental disorders by a trained psychologist. So it is their guidebook of how to categorize different mental disorders.
Okay. So you have a patient.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, they've been exhibiting these behaviours that I can observe. I'm going to... They probably don't have to do this all of the time, but I'm going to consult this big-ass book. There's
plenty of kind of total evidence in there, signs, behaviours, what that means, how that might affect somebody. Now, the original DSM in 1952 How big do you think that was?
Well, everyone knows that mental health was only invented in 1951. So just a pamphlet, just a couple of pages.
It is a pamphlet. It's a 32-page pamphlet. 32 pages. Now, because I like a good game show, Cal.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. How big do you think DSM-5 was that was released in 2022?
I think it has to be loaded into a psychologist's office's car park with a heavy handling truck and mobile crane.
It's not that big, but it certainly will take a lot of your library space.
Yeah.
It's 1,142 pages.
Tons.
Yeah. So you can see the evolution of that. Like the next one, the DSM-2, went from 32 pages to 134.
Yeah.
And with every revision, there's about 200 and 300 extra pages. So as our understanding of mental health grows, our understanding of how to categorize these things also grows.
But how many categories of, like, say, for example, schizophrenia did he have?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because it's almost like you drove in with a segue there. So schizophrenia hasn't always been schizophrenia. So we kind of have to understand the timeline of this. And now I'm not going to go through like Mesopotamia and all the different history things, because we could be here till the cows come out.
Beautiful country.
And I'm sure that we will get time to talk about that. But I'm just going to give you kind of like the history of schizophrenia in 5 points of history, right?
Please do.
So, take you back to ancient Egypt. You've got a Sphinx cat on your lap. There's a pharaoh.
Well, I'm worshipping that Sphinx cat, probably.
Yeah, that's why
I'm on his lap.
Maybe. He's looking at you, you're looking at him, who knows what's going on. Right, so this...
Cleaning his arsehole.
Yeah, and it might explain my next point. This is the earliest documented evidence of schizophrenia-like symptoms.
Interesting.
And it dates back to around 17 BC, before Christ.
Yes.
And what I find interesting about this is they say schizophrenia-like behaviours. So when we think of schizophrenia as a modern society, we think of quite a complex condition that requires kind of antipsychotic medication and care and support.
Yeah.
Now, schizophrenic behaviours, when we look into it, from a historical point of view, is this idea of not being able to have a tangible reality.
Okay.
Not being able to decipher what is real and what is hallucinogenic. Now, there's much more into that.
Yeah. Like, within that, we've got loads and loads of other aspects of modern psychiatry that we can, like, sort of consider. Like, for example, part of that would be the auditory and visual hallucinations, paranoia, specific, paranoid delusions. You know, there's a huge list that would essentially like make up the facets of something that, like, schizophrenia.
There are documents that kind of with ancient Egypt and that kind of civilization that talk about pharaohs having schizophrenic type behaviors, and we saw in Birdman. We saw scenes. So let's bring it back to the film.
Of course, yeah.
We saw
they
scenes.
Worshipped a Birdman, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
Old name dropping this. Osiris.
Osiris. I was going to go Horus, but
Horus
is like the.
There was a few, wasn't there? Horus is one.
You can see me.
Horus is Horus the one with the falcon head? I don't know.
I feel like it
Osiris, Horus.
Yeah,
there's a dog. There's a couple of birds. Anyway, carry on.
So in the film, there's kind of like telekinetic powers where the like glass is being slammed, right, and things are happening, like the light falling on him, and he's like, I did that with my telekinetic powers. Now, there could be an explanation of that he is actually throwing the glass, but in his mind he is thinking he's using telekinetic powers. Now that does connect with actual documentation of what pharaohs would say. I summoned the sun. Yeah. I did this. Yeah. But the followers would see a very different thing. And when they were challenged on it, they were beheaded. And there are references to the idea that the pharaoh probably did think that they were going through that and having hallucinogenic type experiences.
So paranoid delusions, you know, the idea of visual and auditory hallucinations. Yeah, it's clearly something that has occurred even biblical times. I know that's going a little bit further, but I've got some examples here, because a lot of the time what's actually interesting, if you think of modern day, the idea of modern day hearing voices and stuff like that, and schizophrenia, etc., you've got often people associate this with religious experiences as well. And, you've got actually quite a lot of writing on the idea of the role of psychotic disorders in religious history. As you say, like with pharaohs and stuff, that would be the earliest dated stuff. Yeah. I suppose you've got some research into elements within the Bible as well, because there's a lot of people that are essentially basically saying, like, I'm the second coming of Christ. There was one point in time where a group of psychiatrists decided to write a paper on the subject because they had a patient that essentially was exhibiting these behaviors. They were saying they were second coming of Christ and everything like that. And they refused to take their medication because it diminished these abilities, and he wouldn't take them. And basically, when he was pressured to take them, he said, like, how do you know the voices aren't real? How do you know I'm not the Messiah? God and angels talk to people in the Bible, he said. So they were like, okay, fine. Well, let's actually break down what some of the issues that these people in the Bible could have had. I've got a huge list here. Have you got any notes on that specific?
Not specifically about kind of like the religious undertone, but what I found really interesting, because I saw a lot of the references, and usually when a big pivotal like historical thing happens, like the JFK shooting and the John Lennon shooting, quite often this idea of like delusions of grandeur and voices and religious experiences quite often come with that, right? And what I found super interesting is that medical literature only began to discuss this in the 17th century.
Okay.
So we have references to schizophrenic behaviours and delusions of grandeur all the way, to ancient Egypt and the whole period, before Christ. But it wasn't until the 17th century that we decided to actually categorise it as a medical condition, or at least begin the journey of a medical condition. And we can trace back almost any civilization to this idea of kind of like voices in our heads, tangible kind of paranoia.
Yeah.
And then the idea of schizophrenia as a separate entity wouldn't come about until... I'm going to apologise to everyone right now, because I'm about to do what I do best, and that's absolutely character assassinate people's surnames. So
get him!
Yeah,
get him!
And probably diagnosis as well. So M. Kraepelin... That's what I'm going with, and I'm sticking with it.
The inventor of the Kraepelin.
Yeah.
It's like a little crepe.
Discussed the idea of a disease called dementia praecoxia.
Okay.
Or precox. But precox sounds a little bit pretentious, so I put an on it.
Mm-hmm.
This would later kind of separate into lots of different kind of mental health classifications.
Okay.
Obviously being the root word of dementia and Alzheimer's. But then in 1911, Eugene Bigula...
He did have a very big Euler.
He did, very big.
Yeah.
So the reports say. Then classified some of the behaviours as a separate diagnosis that was schizophrenia.
Okay.
And that was kind of the first time that these group of behaviours started to be discussed. And that's kind of...
And separated out.
Yes.
Yeah.
So hallucinations, delusions, disorganised behaviour, confused thinking, all of those as a package started to be referred to as schizophrenia. So when we're starting to then refer back to what you were saying about the historical notes before that, we just had people that were either thought of as liars or thought of as being mentally deranged. It now kind of starts to become a little bit more compact of what the difference is between schizophrenia and other kind of hallucinogenic behaviours, because schizophrenia isn't the only mental health condition that causes you to have hallucinogenic patterns. It's just the one that kind of is all encompassing, and is one that requires a lot of kind of a support.
Psychiatry is just such an interesting topic when you think about it. You know, like the science and like the biological aspects of psychiatry that we kind of cover or understand is very, very small compared to the rest of like modern healthcare, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like there's so much we don't know about the human brain, you know, how it works, etc. And a lot of the time, I think even just the modern day like explanations for things, people will put their hand up and basically say, well, we don't know.
We're guessing. We're making educated guesses.
Yes, exactly.
It's an organ we know. I saw like a thing once, and I don't know how true this is, but I just liked the idea of it. We know as much about the brain as we do the deep sea.
Yeah, I remember this one as well, yeah.
And I like that, because everybody knows that we know nothing about what happens in the deep sea once we hit a certain kind of depth, right? We know nothing fundamentally about the brain. It's like the universe, right?
Yeah.
When we talked about parallel universes, tangent universes in the episode Branching Out, that's the concept that we have now.
Yeah.
Of a little cough for the viewers there. That is the concept that we have now. But in 20 to 30 years' time, I guarantee all of this is outdated.
Yeah.
Maybe not the historical stuff, but the idea of what we consider schizophrenia.
Yeah.
So, for example, a lot of what I kind of looked into, and a little bit of just a side note to make me sound awesome, I am mental health first aid trained, and as part of that, I had to go and do some courses in the history of mental health and the application of that. And what's really interesting, and I'm sure we'll cover it in another episode, is just how mental health was kind of done prior 1950s. We kind of said, you know, mental health was invented in 1951.
Yeah.
Well, mental health care kind of was sort of invented in the 60s, because you just lobotomize people.
Yeah.
Or you would, you know, everyone had mental retardation if they weren't functioning
Or
properly.
if your wife wasn't behaving herself, just get the old lobotomy and then she'll sort herself out.
I've got to do this as a tangent, because this is just something I know. Like, push the notes to the side. This is a crazy thing. This is how crazy the Victorian era was in terms of like the medical community. Are you ready for this wild ride?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, you're a woman. Picture yourself as a woman.
Okay, wait a minute. Okay. Yeah. All right, I'm there.
Okay. You're getting a little horny, right?
Okay, wait. Yeah. Yeah, I'm there.
Yeah. and you're starting to feel some feelings.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I'm going to go to the doctor about this.
Oh, okay.
And the doctor says that you have a problem. Right? So, this is crazy. Yeah. They called it mental exhaustive euphoria or something like that.
Okay.
Right? And basically,
So if a woman gets horny, she has exhaustive euphoria.
Yeah, it's something crazy like that.
Okay.
And basically, do you want to know what the fix was?
A swift kick. What is it?
You've got to give the woman an orgasm.
Okay, and how'd you do it?
So, doctors would go in, they would stimulate the vaginal region, and then a woman would get all the silliness out of her.
Yeah, okay.
And then they could go back to their wifely duties.
Okay.
Right?
But
so what was happening?
Can't the husbands be instructed on how to give a woman an orgasm?
Well, this is the crazy thing, right? So they saw it as a genuine mental health condition.
Yeah.
Like they saw it as kind of a really big problem. Like it would interfere in the way of like the woman's duties.
Yeah.
And so what was happening is doctors were basically jilling off like these women, right? And they started to complain about hand cramps and stuff. So no, this is legitimate. So do you know what happened?
Okay, so they invented the dildo. Bingo!
That's why it exists.
Amazing.
So we can thank mental health for all of our sex toys.
Yeah, nice good stuff. And those exhausted women and those exhausted doctors as well.
Yeah, and now they can do it in the comfort of their own home, give themselves a little sexual examination.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jobs are good.
So that she can get back to her wifely duties.
Yeah.
Of course.
Back in the kitchen, hopefully she's washed her hands.
Yeah. Sure.
There you go.
And the doctors as well.
Yeah. So, our understanding of mental health, I guess, the point is, it is constantly changing because we know so little about how our brains function and what we need it to function. And from an evolutionary point of view, concept of reality has changed so quickly, so fast, that our brains haven't had time to evolve. So the kind of explosion of mental health makes sense as well, right? Because we conceptually aren't built to live like this.
Yeah, and more people are being diagnosed because, I mean, there's a number of different reasons for that. It's now not taboo to talk about it, etc. And obviously people are getting help, etc. And more people are qualified to provide these diagnoses and are more actively doing so.
Yeah, so that was kind of like the underpinning of it, right? And
that was a really interesting tangent. Thank you very much for that. You've got to keep the podcast just a little bit smutty, smutty and informative at the same time.
Sex sells, Cam.
Sex sells.
Sex sells.
You've got to whisper it. Sex sells.
Just as a soundbite. That's
Okay, so I'm going to get us back because I did actually have a point that I do desperately need to get back to. I mean, it's not about dildos. There's actually, funnily enough, there's a very little in the way of mention of dildos and orgasms in the Bible.
Oh, what?
It's not zero, but there's not as much. But anyway, so I was talking about like these different characters within the Bible who could be considered having these psychotic issues and mental health issues and stuff like that, because there is a lot of people that will be diagnosed with hallucinations, paranoia, schizophrenia and stuff like that will link this to God. Okay, so here's a good statistic that's come from this paper called The Role of Psychotic Disorders in Religious History Considered. As many as 60% of those with schizophrenia have religious grandiose delusions consisting of believing they are a saint, God, the devil, a prophet, Jesus, or some other important person. How interesting is that? That, I mean, at the end of the day, like that 60%, people will be thinking at the points before they are, exhibiting these behaviours that they are agnostic or they are atheist. They're not necessarily all religious people, So yeah, really interesting. When you actually get into it, in this paper, it actually gives like a table of different characters within the Bible that they looked at and different passages that would relate to their exhibiting of these signs. Okay, so say for example Abraham. So big thing with Abraham is that he heard the voice of God telling him to kill his son. Okay, so within Genesis chapter 12 you have auditory and visual hallucinations. Okay, within Genesis 12 verses 3, I don't have this up, but it shows a paranoid type and paranoid delusions. Essentially, it's implying a very Abraham-censored worldview of dispensing universal blessings and curses based on one's interactions with Abraham. Okay? What I'm going to do is, within this, I'm going to actually just give you a passage of Genesis 12, verses 3. But I'll just add that in.
The Lord had said to Abram,
"Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you."
But yeah, like there's loads. There's a huge amount of different characters within the Bible. Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Paul would be the biggest ones that have had these delusions. At some point in time, Jesus would have visited a specific island, and there he would have met a man who was, possessed by a demon. Yeah, and so Jesus drives the demon out, etc. It's this whole interesting passage, and yeah, that's going to be just another one that they're not even taking into account here with this study. So it's really interesting how much you look at the Bible and how the idea of auditory hallucinations have made an impact on not only the First Testament but the Second Testament as well, and how that's then ingrained into culture, so much so that we immediately, for at least 60% of us, will go to the idea of, well, I'm this voice that I'm hearing must be the voice of God.
It's really interesting that you brought up demonic possession.
Yeah.
Because we talked about the idea of, recorded history of schizophrenic behaviour, and it wasn't till, the 17th century that it became sort of talked about in medical circles. During the medieval period, the amount of people that were having demonic possessions were at its highest in and around Europe. The kind of witch trials as well, particularly in Cambridge and Oxford, the amount of paranoia and hysteria, the amount of kind of eyewitnesses that corroborated that people were witches, but then when they actually kind of delved deeper, they were having kind of paranoid delusions. So this idea, this tangible thing of trying to make sense of the brain by using religion or using a belief system, because it's not tangible, right?
Yeah.
We talked about this idea on the first episode of water being tangible for life, but being what was the term for everything?
What was it called?
Aerion
or something like that.
Aerion. But this idea of it being tangible, that demons is something that is tangible, right? A driving force. It makes more sense. But as we start to understand the brain more as an organ, as something that works, we're seeing that less.
Yeah.
Because it really was at a fever pitch during those two times, during the witch trials and during the medieval. And it seems like periods of high change are the most prevalent for schizophrenic behaviours. Yeah. And if we look at the film, his transitional period from being a star to being this can barely get a theatre show off the ground, that's a big transitional change.
Absolutely.
For him.
Yeah. High stress situation can create high levels of paranoia and other such things like that. And in high stress situations, you're also making poor lifestyle choices, which can actually affect that, I mean, let's face it, a lot of people, if they're smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol and stuff like that, that can create episodes, of this sort of thing. And if it goes untreated and those bad lifestyle choices continue, then that's only going to continue and exacerbate the situation and get it worse. Just going back, you were talking about the Salem witch trials and witch trials in the UK and everything like that. One of the interesting points that came out when we were recording our Patreon episode on the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece was the idea of wheat being cultivated with certain fungus or mold attached to it, and that would essentially create when people had it, it would create hallucinations and other such things like that. It would potentially make someone exhibit behaviours that you might go, they're not right, they're a witch, burn the witch.
Yeah. And the idea of kind of hallucinogenic properties is prevalent in the UK as well, because we have a mould problem. Yeah. We have a mould problem in this country. We're quite a wet country during the winter. And there's a programme called Uncanny on BBC. It started off as a radio show, much like our podcast setup here. Cool. And then later branched out to TV. And there's a particular episode I always think about, because they have a skeptic, and then they have a spiritual advisor or whatever they're called. Yeah. And the skeptic looked at this case and said, if you go down to the basement 5 years after this person moved out, because everyone that moved into this house had an experience where they had they were lifted off the bed. Wow. They saw this person, and there was about 10 different people who had never met, all said the same story. Yeah. When they went into the basement And when they went into one of the side rooms, because they basically lopped it off and turned it into 2 houses, there was like an unused like room, and then underneath there was this basement, and it was covered in mold. And the guy was like, if you touch this, you would, like, it's so toxic. Yeah. And you will have delusions of grandeur.
I'm surprised they're not dead.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Just even like black mold is enough to kill people, isn't it? Yeah.
And so they were having these massive kind of hallucinogenic properties. So, and when I think of that, and going back to the idea of the film, less of a fact and more of just kind of like a roundup. You saw the theatre. Yeah. It was disused. It was a Broadway kind of out the back. Yeah. There would be mould within like that dressing room was nasty.
That's quite a stretch.
So, you know, like was he having a hallucination?
He was hallucinating off of the toxicity, like coming from the pores of the shitty actors.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you're just going to turn it into like actors sulk again.
They're all delusional, but a different kind of delusional. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So does this sum up where you wanted to go with the whole schizophrenia?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a broad topic, right? This idea of schizophrenia as a condition, and like I said, this will be outdated probably the day it hits, right? Because we're constantly learning more about it. But as a collection of conditions that come together, it's just super interesting to see that, and seeing how that is presented in media, in Birdman and in loads of different places. It's just interesting.
I think what's important to take into account is the idea of Western media, or just generally the idea of how we see hearing voices and things like that in the West, and how that can potentially be different in other countries. So I found some interesting information here. So an anthropologist called Tanya Lerman found that voice hearing experiences of people with serious psychotic disorders were shaped by local culture. So she looked at people in the US, and in the US, the voices are harsh and threatening, whereas voices that people hear in Africa and India were more benign and playful. Huh. And people's perception of what the voices mean for them was then like massively changed as well. I found it really interesting. So for the research, she interviewed 60 adults diagnosed with schizophrenia, so 60 each in San Mateo, California, and then in Accra, Ghana, and Chennai, India. And they asked how many voices they heard, how often, and what they thought caused the auditory hallucinations, and what the voices were like as well. So really big detailed interviews that they're getting, okay? So they asked what people found most distressing about the voices that they were hearing, whether they were positive experiences of voices, and whether the voices spoke about sex or God, okay? Now, it revealed that the hearing of voices were broadly similar across all 3 cultures, and they were reported both good and bad voices. Some spoke of hearing from God, like we talked about, and others felt like the voices were an assault upon them, like, you're not good enough, blah, 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 that sort of stuff. Yeah. The difference was that many of the African and Indian subjects registered positive experiences from the voices. So what they're taking from that is elements of positivity, but not one American did. Yeah? Rather, the US subjects found that the voices were violent and hateful. Kill for me. Ha ha ha. I am the devil. Or I am God. Kill your firstborn son.
Why are you like Darkwing Duck now?
You love him, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay, so, for example, among the Indians in Chennai, more than half heard voices of kin and family members, like giving like positive reinforcement and stuff like that. The Indians heard fewer threatening voices than Americans, and they found that the voices were playful and manifesting as spirits or magic creatures, and could be even entertaining. So they're essentially going about their day and stuff like that, and they've got some company. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you know, people who like do their like jobs and stuff in retail and stuff, and they're talking to someone on their like hands free.
Got Spotify on, listening to
the
2 Strange Men podcast.
I just found it really interesting. In Ghana, the culture accepted that disembodied spirits could talk, and few subjects described the voices in brain disease terms. Yeah. A lot of them in Ghana actually found them to be like godlike, and they described them as God talking to them. Yeah. And yeah, that became like a societal norm to have like the voice of God, essentially. But in India, they were different. They were more playful, and they were more attributed to sex, which was interesting. Like they're getting like people like whispering dirty stuff to them and that sort of thing. So like in America, you've got a lot of people just struggling with threatening voices and stuff. Kill.
In India, it's like, let's go bang something.
Yeah, in India, it's like, ooh,
yeah,
sexy time. And then in Africa, it's God-fearing, you know. Real interesting. And and that's just 3 different continents. If you were to go beyond that and think what it's like in like other parts of Asia or Europe and stuff like that, what would be the differences there? I think definitely in Europe as well as the US, I think that's all lumped together as the West, and you're going to have similar sort of situations. But I don't know, maybe in like, you know, like in the Netherlands or Scandinavia and stuff like that, maybe they're just a bit more relaxed with it. I don't know.
A little bit more playful.
Yeah.
A little bit more like, hands. You could be handsy with your neighbour. I
don't know. I don't know, mate.
Oh, terrible.
That is not advice, guys. Okay, do not go to the Netherlands and be handsy with your neighbour.
Yeah,
okay?
Please don't. Especially hands.
Yeah. No, you don't hands up hands.
Yeah,
no,
he's got a record. It's a big thing.
And he hears voices, okay, and they're not good, and he will kill you. So yeah, that was one interesting way I was able to take this. Another interesting way was I found a couple of stories about people's tumours talking to them, their brain tumours.
Yes.
Have you got any anecdotes for this?
Well, just a personal experience.
Okay.
Not my own.
Yeah.
But somebody I knew at university in first year had a tumour sitting on their amygdala.
Yeah.
And that firstly kind of changed what they visually saw. So they saw in what they described as like loads of different colours. So it wasn't really colourblind because they said they could see people shining.
Okay.
Which was really interesting.
Shining, as in like
Twilight shining. I'm assuming.
Oh right, I thought you were talking about
like
Stanley Kubrick shining.
Yeah, no, not quite. But like, you know, the pinks of someone's skin would have like a shiny effect.
Yeah. So that's a visual hallucination, or it's actually affecting the quality of image that's then being transmitted. Wow.
But they were saying, you know, like if they were having like swelling, they could their words invent scenarios, and those scenarios would feel really real. Yeah, they were able to separate those and go, well, that's just too outlandish. That's probably not real. But they said that like it conceptually felt the same, right? They like if they said someone was there, they could feel that person. Wow. Like, they didn't go into detail whether it was like, you know, like the Indians a little bit sexy or whether they were being roughed up but they said that when they were in that process, their brain did all the work, and they could feel somebody. It wasn't just like a visual thing. It was a sensory thing. They could smell stuff. They said one time they came in and they saw flowers on the side, and they could smell the flowers and they could touch the flowers, and when they turned around, the flowers were gone.
Wow. Okay. I've had friends who have said that they could see my aura. People often do. Like, did they mention anything about like auras and stuff like that? Like,
no. But maybe that's kind of what they were getting at with the colour spectrum, right? That they were able to see these. Yeah. I know we kind of see auras like the Dragon Ball Z, like powering up, like.
I mean, people describe it as like. I mean, like, coming from a film background, I just think of a chromatic aberration, like where the image, the edge of a object or something like that is kind of like bleeding into the background, etc. You know, you get that in like old like video footage and stuff like that. Don't really get it much anymore. But like, that's how they describe it to me. The idea of seeing auras, I just think they're a bit mental. Or just too far gone down the hippie route, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you said, if they've ingested a little bit of the Mary Jane,
Yeah.
then it can have long-lasting kind of hallucinogenic properties if you've had enough of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. We are here to not condone Mary Jane. We're not doing that. We are both teachers. We have never smoked it. That's correct, isn't it, Tom?
That's correct. Yes.
Yes. Yes. That's my standpoint.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, sorry, Dad.
What your dad wanted you to smoke?
No, it's in like you were very kind of like dad-like then.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
We will not. You'd not condone that, son. Take that out of your mouth.
Yeah, we're both dads, and my son might be listening to this.
Yeah.
Do not smoke weed. Anyway, do not enjoy hashish or weed or
Cigarettes.
any of the sort of gummy stuff, the stuff that you can, like the oil that you can put into a spliff, that sort of thing. Don't do any of that, because I've not. Anyway, so I was talking about brain tumours, okay? I've got two very interesting stories that I want to just put out there, okay? So one story has a woman who is having grandiose delusions of being able to talk to God, etc. And I think it leads her to stab someone. She stabs herself. Ooh. She's told to do that. She self-inflicted some stab wounds to her chest, 7 centimetres deep. Yeah, she's lucky to be alive. She said that she was following direct orders from God. So she was in a medical situation, etc. at that point in time. So they did some scans. They found a tumour in her head. Yeah. And then she was able to get treatment, and the voices left her. The voices returned when the tumour returned. Okay.
Interesting.
And what they found out was, what they assumed was that what was happening is, as the tumour was growing, you know, it goes through periods of becoming, is it benign?
Yes.
Yeah. And it will be released from that, and it will continue to grow. And as it continued to grow, you know, the brain will compensate for changes in its structure and stuff like that. You know, you just think of this sort of like, you know, horrible mass just sort of like going over and destroying other things. You know, I always think of Akira, like all of the sort of like the ballooning up and stuff like that, squashing everything in its path sort of thing. Think of that
Fist and the North Star where they're...
Yeah. But like, you know, on a microscopic level, I guess that would look horrible, wouldn't it, for all your nerves and stuff to look at? But anyway, so as that's happening, as it's sort of like increasing in size and stuff, it's going to have an impact on the chemistry of the brain, etc., and how it can work, etc. So it's constantly fighting this idea of, it's constantly fighting this tumour, and the tumour is essentially creating the voices. They'll go away as it becomes benign, but as it increases in size at later dates, the voices will come back.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how something like a tumour can have that impact on something. There's another story that's come out earlier than that. So that was 2015. But we're talking about like 1960s, something like that. You had a woman whose voice essentially told her she had a brain tumour. Okay? So interesting story. So I first heard this on a podcast called John Ronson's On.
Love John Ronson.
John Ronson's amazing. If anyone knows of the Psychopath Test, which is a book that he wrote on the idea of, like, you know, psychopaths walking amongst us, and you might be a psychopath and stuff like that. He's got loads and loads of different series and stuff like that. But this one's a little bit difficult to find because it was a BBC4 exclusive. But I'm sure you can find podcast versions of it. But anyway, so there's this woman, and she goes on holiday. Before she goes on holiday, she starts to hear voices. She is visited by like these different voices that tell her that they want to help her, they're there to help, etc. They are watching her. They even say very early on that we are from the hospital, okay? And we want to help you, and to prove that we're real, we want you to go to the front of your house, look out the window, look, there's a blue car going past. Yeah, so we're watching, okay? But we're here to help, okay? Which, I mean, it's in itself, it's like, if it's a voice in your head, well, that's just you talking to yourself, isn't it? You saying that there's a blue car. But they're making it out like it's like there's people in the other side of the like road, like watching in on what you're looking at, that sort of thing. But anyway, so she gets treatment for it. She gets medication, and the voices go. So she goes on holiday. She goes to Zurich. She goes to Switzerland. And then she continues to hear the voices. The voices come back. They work their way through the medication and they continue to talk to her. But they specifically give her an address with a postcode. Interesting. It's not the type of thing you would normally get, isn't it? So anyway, she gets her husband to take her to the address. Now, I haven't worked out whether she's at Zurich or whether she's come back to England at this point in time, but she goes to the address, okay? And she's given specific directions as to where to go. It turns out it's a hospital, she says, and the voices are telling her, okay, so go through this door, go this way and that. At some point in time, she stops and she says, why? Why am I doing this? And they explain it all there and then. She's got a brain tumor. She needs to be diagnosed with this brain tumor so she can get help. So she goes to the correct department. She gets a brain scan. The doctor has to fight to actually get her this brain scan because otherwise, she is just, someone with auditory hallucinations. Why are you going to just do that? It costs money to do that. And it's like, just trust me. Just please, do this for me, etc. They find a brain tumor. Okay.
That's incredible.
It's an incredible story, isn't it? I'm a little bit dubious with this. They said essentially, the people that heard about this story were basically well, she already knew about a brain tumor. She's just trying to get a free scan. Other people basically said, well, it's just a coincidence. And other people said, well, this is actually quite paranormal. Okay. I mean, the doctor ended up writing in this in medical journals. He ended up touring the country with the woman as well.
Interesting.
Yeah. You know where I'm going.
That casts a little bit of doubt to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, John Ronson didn't really go into this and stuff like that. But, do you know what I mean? Well, this is an interesting story. We might as well sell this story,
Let's just take away some of the conveniences, right?
Yeah.
And let's package this as a strange thing. And we know a lot about strange things. So.
Yeah. And I think we've talked in depth on this strange topic. And it is certainly strange, isn't it? We're still at this point in time in understanding the brain that pretty much any part of it is strange and is a strange topic that we can cover.
And I imagine we will be coming back to these kind of themes a lot within strange and experimental films.
Absolutely. And if you can't wait for the next episode, if you haven't had your fill quite yet, there is always the Patreon episodes. We're able to mention an interesting tidbit on one of the Patreon episodes. Have a listen to those as well. We would absolutely love to take your money. I mean, educate you more.
We're gonna start just dropping some lore from those. You'll be out of the loop.
Yeah, absolutely.
You'll miss
got to
stuff.
Keep up. Yeah. So, the voices in your head, that's us. We are here to essentially say, tune in next week for another strange episode.
For the substance.
Oh, yes, we're going to be looking at the substance, aren't we? Yeah, good stuff.
Bit of Demi Moore.
Yep, and we are going to be, alongside that, we're going to be attaching the concept of meta.
Yes.
And meta-modernism.
I thought you could say alongside that, we've got her coming in. I'm like, no, we haven't. We definitely haven't.
Yes. But that's it. Goodbye from me.
See you later.
Byes.
Thanks for listening. Here's a disclaimer. We are not experts. We could easily get things wrong in an episode. Our intention is to explore and open up the possibilities for further exploration. Come find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and YouTube. We would love some interaction. Also, if you can consider supporting us on Patreon, that would help a bunch. Search for 2, that's number 2, Strange Men Pod, all one word. Until next time, keep it strange.